Hi, my name's Keith Cooper, Northlight Images, and in this short video I'm going to look at panoramic printing on this Epson ET-18100. Now this printer I've looked at producing prints and I know that it's great for producing colour prints on glossy phototype papers. So I'm going to do a print on the sort of paper that it prints best on, and this one is a gloss. Now you'll notice that the sheet is a long thin sheet of paper, ideal for panoramic images. It's actually from a sample kit that I got from Photospeed in the UK, and it is double A4, so it's two A4 sheets end to end, as it were. It's actually half a A2 sheet. So if you take an A2 sheet and cut it down lengthways, 50-50, you get this size. So it's 210 millimeters by 594 millimeters. That's the aspect ratio you get of it. Of course, the thing is with the aspect ratio, that's the aspect ratio of the paper. The moment you start putting a print and you want a border in it, the aspect ratio that fits neatly on the paper varies. So depending on how you produce your panoramic images and how you crop them, they may or may not fit for this. Now, if you want, you could get, for example, 13-inch roll paper, cut it to length, but do be careful with trimming that you get a nice square cut at the ends of the roll. Now, I'm not going to try that one on this one. I'm just going to show the example here because the process is the same. But if you do want to use roll paper, it's important that you get rid of the curl when you're printing. Curl at the front edge of a paper can cause head strikes, ink marks, all kinds of problems. I know it seems an easy thing. Oh, I'll just get some roll paper and cut it to length. Be sure that you've got somewhere where you can flatten the paper out before you print it. If you do print it, it actually shows in the manual, the setup for this. You lower part of the paper feed tray here and have the paper draped over and it just goes through. There is no straight through print path on this particular printer. But I've looked at its benefits and some of its limitations elsewhere. So I'm just going to look at making a print here. Now the image I've got is this one here. It's a harbour in Cornwall, and looking out to sea. In fact, this particular view, if you headed out the direction I'm facing here, I believe the next land you would hit is somewhere in South America. It is facing the Atlantic. That means there's a lot of big storms come in here during the winter. But anyway, this was just a photograph. It's a panoramic shot I've taken from several images, shot with Canon 5DS for 50 megapixel images. I've stitched them together. I've changed the projection to give it the look I want, and I've got a panoramic image that I've printed a few times before when doing testing, and I know that it works. However, this image, if you were to print this on this paper, you would have a gap at each end. What I'm going to do with this particular image, I'm going to print it from Epson Print Layout, the free software that works very well with this. I could print it directly from Photoshop. I've got an old version of Photoshop running on here. CS6 works perfectly well for this still. But I've got this. I'm going to print it using the Epson software, partly because the Epson software is the same on PCs and Macs, and it's pretty easy to use, the settings and things. So there's the image open in Photoshop. Here's the image. I've used the automate menu in Photoshop. I could just drop a TIFF or a JPEG of the image into this. So if you're using Lightroom or something like that. Now, you'll see right away here that the image actually fits the whole paper. How have I done that? Well, in the settings here, I've obviously selected the printer. I've selected Epson Premium Glossy, since that's the paper I'm using. Although it's a Photospeed one, it's virtually identical to the Premium Glossy in terms of this. I've got a paper size set of double A4. Now to do that, I've actually gone to the custom page settings and created a custom page setting. Easily done here in the paper size list. You go to the paper settings. I'll just show the details of it there. Layout settings standard. I don't want anything fancy. It's landscape orientation. I've clicked the scale to fit box, and what that does is prints the image to fit the piece of paper with a small margin. Now the margin on this particular printer I think is just a few millimeters, so you can see that on here. I'm not going to bother printing borderless or anything like that. Generally large prints, unless I'm doing them to hand round and I want them to look, as borderless. I don't want prints like this. If it's going to be framed, I want a bit of a border on it. In fact, I might want a slightly larger border on it here, and you can specify the border on the settings here. You can actually reduce the border, but do be careful with the layout here as to how it goes. If you're concerned about accurate sizing and things, get some plain paper and print on that first. Just get some basic paper and print to check your settings and things. You can get A2 copier paper, maybe a bit tricky to find some places, but I've got A3 and A2 copier paper that I use for testing things. Saved me an awful lot of wasted print paper. But anyway, I've got everything set here. Color settings, I'm using an ICC profile. Selected one of my own. Now for this particular profile, I've selected to use a perceptual rendering intent because we get an element of soft proofing here, and I know that with this particular image, the perceptual rendering intent on this sort of paper gives a slightly better looking print. There is no hard and fast rule, I'm afraid, as to which you should use. Relative colorimetric is perhaps more commonly used. I use it more often, but every so often I have an image which will look better, and that's something to check maybe with soft proofing or something like that. I've got lots of stuff about soft proofing as to why it's vastly overrated in many times. It's useful, but not quite the universal panacea that a lot of people would think it is in terms of getting your prints look right. This image has been printed before, so I know it's going to come out okay. I've got it here on the screen. So I've got this, I've got everything set up for it. I just need to load the piece of paper up. Now, I've pulled the top back here. I'm going to pop this in here. Now I've got that resting in there. It's not a tight fit. There's the two slide bars on either side. It's not a tight fit. I don't want the paper to feel any resistance in going through. In fact, I'm going to move it slightly forward so there is nothing skewing the paper at all on this. The paper is set to go through. You don't load it. I say the 18100, there's no screen or anything. There's no telling it what settings it is or anything like that. It's just an out and out printer. No scanner on top or anything like that. So all I need to do for this is go to print. Now, because this was an image taken with multiple 50 megapixel images, it's a huge file. And in fact, the resolution at this size, it's made for printing very large. The resolution at this size is 844 pixels per inch. Ludicrously high, I hear you say. However, in testing that I've done with these printers, I've found that it causes no harm whatsoever to send excess real resolution to the printers. The days of resizing your images to 300 or 360 ppi, no, you don't need to do that. And in fact, if you've got fine detail in the picture and you print at the better quality settings, in this one there's only two, standard and better as it were, if you print at the better quality settings, you will get slightly finer detail. Now, if you have a look, I've got an article that looks at that for the Epson 8550. Different printer, but an ecotank printer, 6-ink printer, has the same print head. So what goes for that goes for this as well. So, but I put some links in the notes to the video for some of the other information if you want to explore that further. But we're just waiting here now for something to happen. And for some reason, I have a warning. Now, this is one of my big problems with this printer. I have no idea what these warning lights mean. If this was set for, let's say, on an 8550, I'd get a warning message telling me what I've done wrong. Anyway, I will now just stop this for a moment, go away and find the manual and find out exactly what these warning lights mean. No idea. That's why I like a screen on the front. Well, after a quick break to load up the manual, have a look, find out what the paper and spanner symbol mean, lit up here, it tells me that I hadn't quite pulled the output tray out far enough. There you go. If ever proof were needed that having lights like this that light up in various combinations and things is a step backwards in interface design, that is it. However, pull this out, it's cleared, and it seems to be printing just fine. So we'll see what it looks like. It's quite a quick print. It's not slow. It's only printing A4 width, so it's not going to be a difficulty for it there. So we'll see what it comes out like. Well, the print is starting to come out, and it looks fine. There's no marks or anything. There's one of the nice bits about using paper like this, which cut from, say, half A2 sheets, is that it's flat. So I get no feed problems. I don't get problems of, if you're going to use paper cut from a roll, as I've said, be very careful, because it's this leading edge which can cause problems and head strikes, so which typically show as sort of smudges on the corners, and likewise this trailing edge here. It's the leading and trailing edges of sheets where the printing is most problematic, where you're most likely to get problems with it, head strikes and the like. Now, if you have a nice hefty margin on this, a border, then you're less likely to get it. But even so, you can still get, if the paper's curled, even though you're not printing in that, the head can just touch the paper and just make a smudge on it, and you get a little black mark on the corner. Now, not necessarily a problem if you're doing it for yourself and you're going to frame it in a frame and mat it, then that's not really that much of a problem. Annoying, yes, but not a problem. However, if you're doing prints and you want to sell them, then having black ink smudges on them is probably not a good thing. Anyway, this one's coming on quite nicely. Now, I noticed looking at this print and looking at it here on this monitor is that the water, while it looks suitably stormy and the colours are right, the greenness of the water is not quite right. What's caused this? Well, I said I'm using a paper that is very similar to Epson PGPP, which is the one I created the profile for. Very similar, but in this instance not quite the same. Now, sometimes, because there are only so many paper makers, you can take a profile that's for a different paper that seems very similar and use it. However, you need to be aware that you may get your colours come out slightly wrong. How to deal with that? Well, it says here on the label here, free custom ICC profiles. If you buy some paper from Photospeed and some other suppliers here in the UK, if you buy paper from them, they will send you a profiling target so that you can print that out, send it back to them, and they will make you a custom profile. Now, this is tonal wise, it's about okay, but in terms of colour, it's a little bit lacking in the greens, and that's almost certainly come because I've used a profile that I built for another paper, for the Epson paper. If I was using the Epson paper, I'm pretty sure, well, I know it comes out fine on it. So I have a print that actually is not a bad looking print, but it is a print that is not as surefire a match to this image here on the screen as I would normally like. Now, if I was printing this often, now it turns out this printer's going back to Epson tomorrow, so I'm not going to be making custom profiles for this particular paper. The paper looks great, the print looks great, but it isn't quite right. So if you want the best results out of this, it is dependent on getting good quality profiles. Now, some suppliers will have profiles already if you can get it. For some bizarre reason, this particular printer is not yet available in the United States. I've had loads of people ask me about it, but sorry, I don't know why. Ask Epson. But if you want to get this, there will be more and more suppliers are producing profiles to get the results out of this. Now, what do I notice about the borders? I've actually got a slightly short border at one end. Now that suggests that this paper may not even be 500 and quite the size, the 594 millimeters I put in it. If you're using custom sheets, particularly if you've cut them off a roll, measure them accurately and put those sizes into your custom media settings. I've just gone for double A4 without actually checking. Normally I wouldn't print small margins like this, but very small borders like this do show up any slight change. Now, it looks fine. Not perfect, but I know why it's not perfect. So get your profiles right, get your paper sizing right, particularly if you're making custom sheets of paper. And remember that the aspect ratio of the paper only applies if you're printing borderless. Yeah, borderless. You can't print custom sizes borderless. So you're going to have a border of some sort. So think of that when you're doing your calculations as to how much paper how big your image is going to be, depending on the format that you've taken for it. Anyway, hope that's of interest for people looking at doing panoramics. I put some links to some other info I've done on panoramics as well in the notes for this. And if you've got any questions, please do ask. I'm happy to answer. As I say, the printer's going back, but I will be finishing off the written review of this in due course, which I'll put all the details and bring all the details together for it. But anyway, hope that's of interest, and thanks for watching.